Ever wonder why some couples can't seem to communicate without things falling apart? The Gottmans discovered four communication patterns called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, also known as the Four Horsemen, that can slowly and even silently damage communication in a relationship. Let's break them down and talk about how to keep them out of your conversations. The Four Horsemen are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Criticism is attacking your partner's character instead of addressing a specific behavior or concern. Defensiveness is responding to feedback with excuses or blame instead of taking responsibility for the feedback. Contempt is speaking with disrespect, sarcasm, or superiority, which is the most damaging of the four. None of them are great, but contempt has a special flavor to it. Stonewalling is withdrawing or refusing to engage in conversation to avoid conflict. So with four issues, we want to look at what are the solutions. So the four horsemen are the problematic behaviors, and what we ask and what we're hoping for is that couples can learn the antidotes to the four horsemen to make their communication better. We're going to use an example couple to walk through how the four horsemen show up in real time. So let's say our couple's names are Mike and Shannon. Mike and Shannon are busy people, so finding time to do just regular household tasks or schedule appointments or figure out what to have for dinner, all of those things are really a challenge. And so when it comes to the both of them finding time in their schedule to spend time together, and especially on a date night, is like moving heaven and earth. But this time they commit, they find the time, they schedule the date, and they are planning to make it happen. So a little bit about them. Shannon is more time conscious and she likes to plan things out. She knows, sort of when she needs to do this or that to make certain things happen. Mike is a bit more relaxed. He gets things done, but can be a bit time blind from time to time and not always recognizing how quickly or not time is passing. The date night gets scheduled and Shannon is very aware that time is moving quickly. They're supposed to be at a performance at 6 p.m. She looks and it's 5:30 and Mike is nowhere to be found, or she has no signs that he's actually getting prepared to leave. She does a couple things and then time is continuing to move. Because this is how they tend to function in the relationship, by the time her frustration hits its highest point, Mike just kind of, comes in doing what he does, and now they're running late. Shannon says, you know what? We can never get anywhere on time. You always do this or that. And Shannon has now issued criticism. The antidote to criticism is what we call the gentle startup. And the way I like to think about it is this formula, and it's all I statements. I feel X, where X is an emotion, about Y. Y is neutral context, and I need Z. So in this case, instead of Shannon going on the attack and talking about why Mike is the problem and they're running late because he can never do this or he always does this, what she might say is, hey, I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed because it's now 5:55, let's say, and we're supposed to be there at 6 and we're running late. I need us to get a plan so we can be on the same page about time and make adjustments for tonight's date night. In that example, I feel X, the emotions are stressed, frustrated. The Y in the neutral context is it's 5:55. They have to be somewhere at 6. That's a fact. The way to think about neutral context is if someone who was not a part of a conversation walked into a room and they reported on what happened, that's neutral context. It's very black and white. It's as objective as it gets. What that helps you to do is not cross back over into criticizing your partner again and blaming them unintentionally. And the Z can be a need, a desire. What you want to do is leave your partner with something that you're asking them for. So it's not just you issuing a complaint that goes nowhere. So if Mike and Shannon are new to the Four Horsemen or they've never heard of them, and Shannon issues this criticism, Mike's natural inclination is probably going to be to defend himself. So he's going to fire back. So now we have the second Four Horsemen, which is defensiveness. So the antidote to defensiveness is being able to take even a small part of the responsibility for what is happening, from the feedback that you're getting from your partner. It's not about blame and taking on blame. What it is about is being able to neutralize the potential of the conflict or what's going to derail the conversation so that it can be productive. So what Mike might say once he kind of gets over his initial reaction is, hey, you know what? I get that you're frustrated. I can own that maybe I didn't have to go and organize the garage at that particular point in time. I could own that I lost track of time. Any version thereof where he's just saying, hey, I'm still in this with you, but you know what? In terms of what I can control and what I contributed, this is what I can identify. That's going to help Shannon to feel like, okay, we are on the same page. She might still be a little bit frustrated, but it doesn't necessarily derail the conversation, and it doesn't put them into what we call an attack and counterattack, where criticism gets issued, the other person responds back with defensiveness, and then you go back and forth. We want to avoid that. Contempt is the third of the Four Horsemen, and most, including John Gottman, believe, as I mentioned before, that it is the most damaging of the four, and we'll talk about why that is in just a second. If we get back to Mike and Shannon, so let's just say they didn't know the antidotes to criticism and defensiveness, or they forgot them, and the conversation gets escalated, and now they are in a conflict. If either one of them were to say something like, only a person that's stupid wouldn't understand why we couldn't do this or that, or anything along those lines, that's going to put them squarely in contempt. Contempt is that disrespect, it's the sarcasm or air of superiority. And usually it's pretty insulting and hurtful. When you think about the context of a relationship or a marriage, you don't want to be speaking to someone that you love in that way. And so someone may say, well, I didn't say, they were stupid, but you implied that they were. And again, someone that you love, that you're in partnership with, that's not the way that conversation or communication should go. So the antidote to contempt, in my opinion, is almost like a 10x version of the antidote to criticism. So what I recommend is that you start with that gentle startup, the I feel X about Y and I need Z, and then you add additional context so your partner can hear, sort of your heart and what you're really asking for and where and why that is coming up for them. So what that might look like, if Shannon is frustrated, and before she goes to contempt, what she might want to do is be able to pause, even though she's frustrated that they're running late, and say, hey, I feel really frustrated or stressed when we do all this work to plan this date night, and then at the end of the day, we're going to be late or we're running the risk of missing it. I care about this because it's hard for us to find time together. Growing up, I never saw my parents have fun together or laugh or spend time. And so something that was important to me being in a marriage was being able to have my partner be my friend and us enjoy each other. Something along those lines. Her partner, in this case Mike, is going to hear that way different than the criticism that she issued before. So, again, starting with that gentle startup, adding that extra context to help your partner understand where, this is coming from is going to be really useful. Contempt, I think, falls in that category of being the most damaging because, in my opinion, contempt shows up when resentment now is present. When someone is crossed over into this area where they feel like there's not a solution possible or things are never going to change, it's almost like they quietly give up or give in. And so, there's no holds barred. They can kind of do whatever and say whatever because they feel like ultimately the relationship is going to end. So we want to keep it out of that territory because that can feel pretty, hopeless. So if Mike and Shannon had not heard of the Four Horsemen and their antidotes, or if they forgot them because now they're in the midst of a conflict, and one of them or both of them start to sort of shut down a bit, maybe they are not talking, maybe it's just one word answers, yeah, fine, whatever. Now we have our fourth horseman, which is stonewalling. That's that withdrawing or refusing to engage in a conversation to try and avoid conflict. But it's not better once the conflict has already began. Because what happens with stonewalling is that the brain is still very much connected to what's happening, but it's also in fight or flight. So it's designed to protect itself. So that's why it starts to withdraw and say less, because it thinks that that's what it's doing to prevent a conflict from happening. The antidote to stonewalling is exactly what you would do with that. So when you're in fight or flight, you've got to be able to sort of bring yourself back online. So what that often means is pausing that conversation or being able to shift gears. So for Mike and Shannon, that gentle startup was so important because what that got them to do is focus more on a solution. Because if it's 5:55 and they've now taken 10 or 15 minutes to argue about that, they're late anyway. So what you want to be able to do with stonewalling is be able to kind of pinpoint what you need in the moment to be able to have an effective conversation, because you can't when you're in fight or flight. So it might mean saying, hey, you know what? I do want us to have a conversation about how we plan. and plan our time so that in the future that we are not late for things. But in this moment, I think we should do this. Or in this moment, I am escalated. I am, maybe a little bit frustrated or feeling, emotionally flooded. So I'm not in the best space to kind of problem solve, but let's talk about next steps and what we do. Something along those lines to kind of slow things down because they can't solve for all of that in that moment, especially when they've been in a conflict. With stonewalling, sometimes what needs to happen is a break. Ideally, depending on the topic, a minimum I say of 20 minutes where you can kind of take a little bit of a walk or go to a different room or do some mindfulness in terms of deep breathing, maybe even meditation. For some it's just kind of prayer or even just silence, just to sort of reset, and then try to come back to the conversation. Continuing to just talk about it over and over and over again and adding more quantity of communication is usually not effective when you need to improve the quality of your communication. Understanding the Four Horsemen and their antidotes is a really important first step to improving your communication and building a stronger connection with your partner. If you're ready to go deeper and learn some practical tools and skills to keep these types of patterns out of your relationship, visit my website or reach out directly. I'm here to help you create the partnership you deserve.